Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Q&A session for the Protect Alliance. We'll open it up. Anybody on the floor got any questions for any of the speakers that we had today? Please put your hand up if you've got a question for any of the speakers. Yes, sir.
This is a question for Alice at SCG. How would your product work with special needs schools and that sort of environment?
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking. Thank you very much. Basically, the easiest way to talk about a solution is to think about all needs and being completely encompassing of everything. So we've dealt with some, as an example, some schools who've said, we've got specialist needs children, we have people that might be hard of hearing, and you have to think about how you build that bespokely. So it can be things like different alerts that go out. Rather than having sound alerts, you'd probably have visuals for teachers, or you might have a flashing beacon light, and they're non-strobe as well, so they don't affect people with epilepsy and things like that.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. Any more questions from the audience? Yes, one more, please.
This is a question for Jodie Read. Just wondering who and what sort of businesses will Martyn's Law affect?
The draft Terrorism Protection of Premises Bill defines that in what is known as Schedule 1, but in very simple terms, it will be qualifying premises will include things like hotels, it will include things like schools and universities and religious buildings. So there are defined qualifying premises in the draft legislation.
Thank you, Jodie. Any more questions? Oh, yes, sir.
So certain qualifying premises could be historical or, what's the word I'm looking for, listed, grade listed. So have historical, does it impact those type of buildings and changes to those, and how will they deal with it compared to a more modern building?
It won't necessarily affect listed buildings. It could. It depends on partly on crowd capacity. Those numbers were previously above 100. Currently, the proposal is for above 200. What has changed, though, is the way in which you calculate the number of people. So previously, it was based on members of the public. Now, it's total number. But there are different ways of computing that.
Any more from the audience? Yes, sir.
It's a question for Phil at Forsetti Training. What do you foresee as an outlook for the sort of first aid environment in the coming year, 2025?
So first aid itself is always going to be needed in the workplace. Health and safety legislation may already dictate that people need to have a certain amount of first aiders within the workplace. With the proposals put together currently for Martyn's Law, the chances are that first aid requirements will become obligatory for people under the qualifying practices. But that is all dependent. At the moment, we're still waiting to see the final draft. We have big supporters in the likes of Fig and Murray and the Select Committee who do want to see life-saving skills put into the legislation in writing so that it takes away the risk element part of people doing an assessment and saying, yeah, that might be okay. It will actually mandate that there will be first aiders on duty should that make it into the final bill. At what level they're trained will be another thing. But at the moment, we know that the SIA is a regulating body, are already changing security requirements that as of 1st of April, all security operatives must be trained on critical bleeds and the equipment such as hemostats and tourniquets. So with them being put in charge of enforcing Martyn's Law, it would stand to reason that we're expecting some big changes on the first aid front.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? No? Okay, well, luckily, I've got a couple here that were handed in earlier on. So I've got one for CrowdGuard. So the person was interested in what you've got, but they got the impression that the equipment is expensive. It's obviously well made. What are the budgetary implications? Is this something anybody can use, or is it just for the big organisations?
Cheers, Andy. Thank you. There's a common misconception out there that hostile vehicle mitigation is expensive, and what we do at CrowdGuard is help people understand what the threat is and what the risk is so they can put proportionate measures in. That's what's absolutely critical, because That's what drives the cost down. And we also highlight to people any residual risk that they may be left with. Accepting risk is perfectly okay, providing you understand the risk that you're accepting. So the answer to the question is no, it's not just for the big event spaces or the big stadia. It's actually for anybody that holds events that do or do not even fall into the 200 plus or 800 plus categories of Martyn's Law. There's a duty of care of people attending events or stadiums or crowded places. The cost of HVM can be considerably less than what people expect. Most of our contracts, you're talking about pence per head per attendee of an event, not even pounds per head. So yeah, it can be quite cost effective compared to what people think. Thanks, Andy.
As it happens, I've still got one question to go, and that's for Chris. Look at the IT side of things. You mentioned during your presentation, you referred to a variety of different threats that were likely to happen. But one person, maybe slightly cynical, realistically, how likely are these threats to occur, or are they simply theoretical threats to consider?
Thank you, Andy. They're absolutely real. My team is working on a data breach with a sporting organisation. Fortunately, they don't have venues. If they did, this would come to the scope. So essentially, this is not on film and TV anymore. It is not fiction. This is reality. Every week, our team are dealing with organisations having a cyber failure of some sort, which often leads to a data breach, which leads to impacts against people, impacts against the organisation, and potentially regulatory penalties of some sort. Okay, fines in some cases may happen, but reputational damage actually for me is one of the largest ones. If you've had a major incident at a venue, are other people want to come to your venue to run events? And if you have the second one, it's probably the finish of your event. So for me, I'm less worried about, organisations, I'm seeing them less worried about the fines and the penalties, but reputational damage is a thing which is driving people to look at how do they secure it from a physical perspective using CrowdGuard technology or other technology was talked about earlier, putting policies and procedures in place and looking at that digital infrastructure.
So thank you very much for your questions. We're getting near the end of the session now, so unless anybody's got any final questions they'd like to ask of the panel? No? So I just ask you to put your hands together and thank the panel for their presentations today. Thank you very much.